Planning Commission to order. Can we get a motion for the approval of the minutes? What happened to Brenda? There a second ago.
She's here.
Oh, okay, okay. Wait a minute.
I will move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Weston.
Second.
Adrian seconds. Andres?
Yay.
Adrian?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Clark?
Yes.
Brenda? Are you good with the minutes? Yes. Thank you. The minutes are approved. The chairman has nothing to report. Does the vice chair have something to
I
report?
have nothing to report.
Director?
Nothing specific to report. We have a number of projects that the Planning Commission has seen that have been forwarded on to the City Council. They're all kind of in this briefing work session phase, so we'll have a number of updates coming up here within the next month or two on projects that you've seen.
All right, thank you. Okay, our first item is a continued item from last week, the Urban Alfandre FBUN2 building height amendment. Casey?
Thank you. This is, as you stated, a continuation from last meeting. James Alfandre has submitted a request to amend the zoning ordinance to allow additional height for properties that he either owns or has interest in for a particular project he's looking at. There was some discussion last meeting and some confusion about exactly the wording that he was proposing and whether it would work for his project. So after the meeting, we sat down and tried to come up with a few different ways to word the text amendment to accomplish his goal. Came up with about 3 different ways to go with that, but it essentially would include either coming up with a legal description of all the properties he owns or some type of dimension that the height would be allowed for, horizontal dimensions. But really, we're here this evening with the elemental question of which properties, if any, would the Planning Commission recommend for additional height. And knowing those properties, then we could tailor that language to mimic that. So the proposal tonight would be for you to just utilize the map on page 2 that I provided with your memo. And if you're inclined to grant additional height, then to specify which properties that would apply to. And then myself and the applicant, with the help of our attorneys, can work out that language to accomplish that. And then just a final note that staff continues to recommend against the additional height for these properties. We feel that the current ordinance is sufficient. And I think also just want to let you know that you have been receiving comments as they've been coming in, some email comments. So you have a copy of those. And there are, I believe, people here who have indicated a desire to speak. The public hearing was closed at the last meeting, so I'm not quite sure how you want to handle that. But the applicant is here if you would like to address any questions to him as well. I'll just run through slides from last time. As a reminder, here's a overview of the site, the entire site. outlined in yellow. And here's the same map that's included in your memo with the properties, the individual properties identified. Just a reminder that the corner property up here is already eligible for the additional height, so it would not be part of the request because it's already there. This is the intersection map showing where the other intersections are that are allowed additional height, if you wanted to reference that. And then the applicant's proposed project. Just a reminder that the project may or may not end up like this. You're not approving the project per se, you're approving just additional building height. Okay, that's it.
Questions for Casey?
Yeah, Casey, so I just want to make sure, this corner height is just dictated in the master plan for that area, correct? It's basically saying that they want that corner to have height and the other areas, from what I remember, to kind of taper off or to be lower from that point. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Does it say anything about what the desires are for Washington Street or 200 West at all?
No, it essentially, I mean, the intent was that those would, the intent is stated by the current building height allowances, that it would be lower on the interior block, higher on the prominent intersections. And those intersections are noted in the ordinance.
And then, so if we were to approve something like this, that would mean that the property between square 1 and 3 would not be allowed to have additional height, and nor would any of these properties behind 7 or 16. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. South of 7 or 16 would not be eligible.
But they're all in the same zone. So how are they? Is it designated by some sort of note right on that property, or how is that managed?
That's what we would have to work out after this meeting is either come up with a legal description that would encompass those parcels and cite that in the ordinance. That does get cumbersome when you try to insert that into the ordinance, but
I mean, and then how do we prohibit that property between 1 and 3 from later saying, well, I want that height too?
that's a good question.
Or the property behind 7? That's one of the thoughts that I was having.
And I could go, but to go back to your question on how, I think you were asking, how does the ordinance handle that extra height now, language-wise? Is that what you were?
Clark, your microphone's not on.
Oh, sorry. Do I need to repeat myself? Or?
And then if I may, just further address that question. So the master plan refers to the urban design element, which references that downtown, yes, that there is a preference for the intersections to be taller than the others, the inner block areas. And the downtown plan encompasses this area. So that's where that's coming from. And then the ordinance itself, the FBUN2 ordinance, reflects that by allowing additional height at certain intersections.
Related to Clark's question, would we be able to grant extra height for that space in between 1 and 3 tonight? Or is that, because that's not part of the application and that's not our concern, just to make it all even? Feels more comfortable.
I attempted to contact the owner of that property to engage and ask that question. I didn't get a response, so that would be tricky because they haven't given their consent expressly.
Okay.
I have a question for Paul.
Sorry,
That's okay.
we're debating the merits of things.
So the comment we got regarding notice and whether the public
Right.
hearing was properly noticed, did you look at that? And
I did. So it's a little bit complicated in that normally when we're talking about specific parcels, we're talking about a rezone. This is a text amendment where part of the FBUN2 identifies certain parcels for additional height, and that's what the applicant is asking for in this application. I think that there is an argument as a logical extension of the application that other parcels could be identified in the text amendment because we are amending the FBUN2 potentially. It is definitely a different circumstance because if this were a rezone, we would identify specific parcels that are the subject of the action. Because it's not a rezone, a little bit of a different animal.
Okay.
And I think it would be reasonable to defend a position that that this is within the scope of that application. At the same time, I would understand if the commission had concerns and said this kind of smells more like a rezone.
thank you.
Questions for Casey? Do we want to bring up the applicant? Does anybody want to talk to him? Discussion?
Well, I agree with Paul. That was my thought earlier, was that why isn't this a rezone? If it's really bleeding out for more than the intended master plan, what was set there, and then it makes all of these properties that are very similar to it around it at kind of an unequal situation, and would maybe probably require them to go back and get some sort of other future council to win or to convince them to approve further height for their development as well. I mean, what's stopping them, because they're no different. You know, this piece right between the two that he owns is no different. I don't know. I'm actually really in favor of increasing density in this area, but I don't think this is the way to do it. I think it needs to have a distinct zoning that's separate from this FBN2, because the FBN2 is different enough.
Well, another way to accomplish that would be to require a development agreement as a condition of the rezoning. I mean, that way it would be site-specific and would address the plans that he's proposed, and that way it's more site-specific than just the text amendment, and there are more controls for the city in terms of the development. So no one's proposed that, but that, might be something to consider.
So no one has, I don't know that people have mentioned this. And so I want to know where people are on this. I am okay for some reason with 16 getting additional height since it's all truly one building. But I don't understand the height jumping to another building. It's not, to me, that there's something very different happening there. And it feels uncomfortable to me, be jumping over an alley to a second building. But, sometimes I have a wrong read on things, so, I'd like to know what other commissioners think.
I agree. I mean, I think that side of the alley there's different things going on there. Right now, it looks like there's the potential of it being filled with other developments that are at their height limit. So why are we not granting additional height to those developments? Which I'm not even against, but.
Is there a particular reason this isn't a planned development, or would that not do what needs to be done here?
a plan development for properties in the FBUN2 district,
Yes,
they could use a plan development to get 5 feet of additional height.
I see.
That wouldn't provide what he needs.
Okay. Why does the applicant need the extra story of height? Or is it 2 stories?
I could attempt to answer that, or if the applicant's here, if you'd like him to answer that.
You want me to call him up?
Well, sure.
Would the applicant
He's
please come
here.
up? Just please state your name for the record, and did you hear Brenda's question?
I did, yes.
Okay.
I'm James Alfondre with Urban Alfondre. The reason for the extra height is twofold. It all stems to the environmental contamination that is spread across this entire site. We started with just 3 parcels here 2 years ago, and as we did our testing and we found out the extent of the contamination, it's grown to 8 parcels. It's never been our intention to go in and assemble a bunch of land and then ask for height just for the sake of that. In speaking with the neighborhood, we've done a ton of neighborhood outreach. I don't know if I've done a very good job of showing that, but we've met extensively with the Ballpark Community Council and the Central Ninth Community Council. The Central Ninth Community Council chair is here now. I know it's not a public hearing, but that neighborhood is very unique in the sense of the zone that's down there in the way to enhance what's happening there. Great neighborhood nodes around track stops. So with the contamination, we're very limited on what we can do there. We can't excavate any dirt from that site. We also are limited on the use we can have on that ground floor. We can't have any residential uses on that ground floor. We have to do vapor barriers, other mitigating factors to allow, aside from cleanup, to reach the standards to allow residential uses there on the second floors and above. So commercial, we want to front 9th South with commercial, and then use the extra height to be able to get more creative with our parking. So in talking with the neighborhood, they're really fed up. Well, I shouldn't say fed up. From what I heard, it's called a bait and switch, where developers come in and say they're going to do parking and they don't end up doing parking. So you have projects down there that are very inadequately parked, almost have no parking on site. So the extra height allows us to stack parking in the rear of the building while providing commercial uses on the ground floor and keeping our lobby and our other amenities off of the ground floor. It also, as we've gone through this process over the last year, we're still doing drilling on that site, and the contamination is very, very extensive. Very, very costly and very extensive. So in meeting with the neighborhood, what this site has going for, I'm glad the contamination is on the south side, because if it was on the north side, this would be a very difficult sell, because the residential streets of Washington and Jefferson north of 900 South are specifically in the zoning called for as being protected. Whereas south of 9th South is all FBUN2 that doesn't have that same residential character. So the city, in meeting with the community, that was a big part, that it's on the south side of 9th South. And what it comes down to as well, they're really excited about this with the commercial uses and the design we're doing here, but also the fact that this property has sat vacant for years, and it's been crime-ridden, and it's been saddled with all this contamination that we are now dealing with. And this height is critical. And we would ask to, I would ask to clarify what Casey said, that we would ask for a vote on the height for the whole project. It has to be all or none for us to make this work feasibly and to provide the kind of project we want to provide there. So the contamination is what's different from any other parcel here. This site, all these parcels are severely contaminated.
Are you confident that that the contamination hasn't gone into any of these properties you don't own?
Yes, so we've done a ton of testing. We have a map that shows the plume, which is, there are 3 levels of the plume. It's closer to the surface, mid-surface, and subsurface underneath the groundwater. We control all of the plume, and the only off-site it does is go into Ninth South. But what we're finding in our testing is that all of that is deep contamination, where it's below the water table, which so the state is requiring us to remediate the source that is close, the source areas to remediate that. But all the off-site plume, it is deep enough where it doesn't cause an impact to anyone else negatively, unless they drilled down themselves 40 feet deep and released those fumes. So we have an approved remedial action plan from the state Department of Environmental Remediation. That took a lot of work to get, and it spells out all of this. So we are able to control all of that by owning these 8 parcels. And again, it was never our intention to own 8 parcels down in this project. We just had Chuckles Lounge, and we were moving forward with that. But for the last 2 years, you can't do any. So we're in a unique position. It's good and it's bad. You know, we actually got into this big ball of wax, and it unintentionally. But we're in a very unique position because we control all the contamination now, so which means these sites can be redeveloped at once. If we were Chuckles, we would go to Henry's and say, "You guys caused this contamination. We're going to sue you guys because you caused this contamination, and so you need to make it right." And so all of these legal issues are now put to bed because we control all of the contamination.
I think that may be a good thing to tie a geographic boundary to and say that this additional height is allowed only above this contaminated area. And that way it excludes anything else in that area and in that zone. Sorry.
Speak up.
So it keeps, it designates those properties pretty specifically, and it also excludes any of the other FBUN2 areas nearby. What do you guys think?
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I don't have a thought on that, so if anyone has a thought on that, go for it. But I do have a question for Casey. Can you reiterate why staff is recommending to put forward a negative recommendation? Where that comes from again? I'm trying
Sure. First off, the FBUN2 ordinance is about 5 years old, adopted in 2014. So we would anticipate a longer period of time to see the effect of that zoning district because it was new at the time, a form-based code. So we'd like to see how that plays out before we start increasing the height of chunks of that. That's one point. The second point is referring to the master plan, which also the urban design element talks about having prominent intersections with taller buildings to push the density there, the activity there, with smaller buildings trailing off to the interior of the block. So those are the two main reasons, and also to try and avoid isolating certain parcels that have extra development rights versus others that don't, but are in the same zoning district, kind of alluding to Clark's point earlier.
Okay.
If
Thank
I could,
you.
if I could speak to that too quickly, there was a rezone done after this zone was implemented on Fayette Street and 9th South. So we're not the first one to come in and ask for extra height after this zone has been established. So I think that's an important part.
Well, and I know the first time that you came in, my hesitation was because I agreed with staff that, you know, a lot of effort in the community has been made with the master plan and the zoning and all that stuff. And at the time, with the original plan, there was some hesitation from the community. It feels like to me the community has completely turned around on this, at least the majority, and they're strongly in favor of it from what I can see. To me, that sort of alleviates some of the concerns that I shared with staff initially, that the community seems on board, and then just philosophically, you know, being in the proximity it is to mass transit, I think that we should be willing to add density where we can, especially if there's a good reason for it, like this contamination. It seemed like, at least in the Central 9th letter, there was a lot of their reasons for liking this project was tied to your interest in doing the parking with this project.
Yes.
And I don't, but this zone does not require parking. Is that what? Am I recalling that correctly? So would there be a way to tie the extra height to granting or to doing that parking element for the community, since that's what they are looking for? Or is that something?
So if I can speak to that, we actually have to come back for a plan development.
Okay.
Because the zoning calls for 75% of ground floor facing public streets to be habitable space. But we can't do that because of our contamination, and our equity isn't comfortable wrapping retail all along Washington and 200 West. They would never go for that. So we've discussed this with the community that, well, we're going to make 900 South fantastic, and we're going to add 196 on-site parking stalls. But we're going to have to go to plan development because we're not going to be able to meet some of those requirements because of the contamination that's on this site. So I can confidently say we'll be able to tie parking and other things that we're talking about, retail on the front, to this project.
I think I think I'm generally in favor of it, but my one lingering concern is that one orphan property in between 1 and 3. And maybe that's a weird thing to have a concern about, but it just...
I'm concerned about it too, but I think we should just grant them the height exception as well. Because they're under, if they were to...
Well, Clark, to your point, they're contaminated as well, so
Right.
they would be involved in that process of granting them an extra 5 stories. And we have to work closely with them through this contamination on testing their property and remediating it properly per the state code as well. So we've been in touch with them, and we plan to be a great neighbor. They have 2 great retail fronts that is going to break up the street well on 9th South. So anyway.
Casey, is Clark's suggestion of tying the height to the contamination, is that feasible? Is that something we can do, or is that...
That seems a little bit difficult at first consideration because we'd have to reference his study and then
I think
somehow
you could
incorporate that into the ordinance.
I think you'd reference the state, having an approved state remediation plan. That has to be done through the state. So that's an official document.
Right. The problem with that is it could be a traveling boundary,
Yes, it could.
which is very complicated for us to do.
Right.
Well, it was a complicated situation.
But the remediation plan is for a moment in time. Yeah. So I'm sorry. I'm
It's
fading
okay.
out here. Now, but the remediation plan, as I understand it, is for a moment in time. It's kind of a ollie income free. If you do this plan, then you're no longer responsible for somebody coming back later and saying, "Oh wow." But so that's a plan that has to be carried out precisely, and it's a state plan. I don't know why you couldn't tie something like this to having that approved kind of plan.
Another thing, if I may add, in the zoning, it specifically talks about more density along major corridors. So anyone who's just fronting Washington or those residential streets, that's not a major corridor. It specifically calls out 900 South as a major corridor. So I don't know if that alleviates looking at the zoning text that's already in place on ways to really, on ways to then, if someone in Washington comes and says, well, they got height, we want height. Well, they're not on a major corridor like this assemblage will be, fronting on 9th South with 900 South address. On the south side of 900 South.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree with that. If the commission decides to forward a positive recommendation onto the city council, then, I mean, I would recommend that you do it based on some of the reasoning why we have the extra height in place already, and that's because it's on a block corner, it's near transit, things of that nature, as opposed to a contamination issue. I mean, you base it on a contamination issue for this property, some other property could come by and say that, oh, I've got this issue that requires me to go this high. I think you want to do it on the basis of why those corner properties are zoned the way that they're zoned.
Well, I mean, if you're going to grant further height in this area, this is in that pattern. It's just, I'm sorry, I don't know how to.
We're doing the best we can with bad acoustics and.
Okay, is that better? So, this seems like a logical extension of that corner if it's being developed as one project. And I think that the underlying justification should be the contamination, because that is a unique thing to this situation. And probably if somebody came with that same unique situation, they should be granted a similar type of arrangement. But those are my thoughts.
Anyone else? Keep trying. Brenda, your mic's not on? Thank you.
There you go.
Based on the information presented and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council approve the expanded Alfondre zoning map amendment petition, PLN PCM 2017-00590, for the following reasons, and that the planning staff draft the necessary ordinance language to reflect this recommendation. The primary factor here is that the rest of the block can be developed at 65 feet, and we feel that this is a reasonable high-density move for this area.
And part of what you're looking for is a description, right?
No, they
It's
have to
part
do
of this.
that.
We'd come up with that later.
You'll
have to
do
do
that,
that.
okay.
I'll second.
Any more discussion?
Can I make one additional suggestion that we require? My microphone is on, thank you. I will try to talk right into it. Is that better?
Of course.
That we require that the consolidation of the parcels into one parcel as part of this, so we don't end up with, if this deal falls through, individual separate parcels with something we're not anticipating.
That is an accepted amendment.
Can I make sorry, I'm not part of this voting situation, but
No.
we need to make a clarification on the motion, and it's not exactly correct as written. It's actually it's the zoning text amendment.
Okay.
We have in your zoning map amendment, but this is actually a zoning text amendment, which is, it's odd, but I want to make sure that we're getting the right language in here.
Would you change that motion to
I will.
reflect that it's a zoning text amendment?
That is a friendly amendment. I accept it.
And the second?
Yeah, I'll accept it.
Okay. And any more friendly amendments? or unfriendly amendments? All right, let's take a vote. Brenda,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Agree.
Sarah,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Adrian,
Yes.
Andres.
Believe it or not, I'm still undecided, but no matter what I say, I'll say no.
Hey, the motion passes, so we're sending a positive recommendation to the city
Thank you very
council.
much. Really appreciate it.
Good luck.
Okay, we'll move on with the agenda to the first item that requires a public hearing, the ADU conditional use at 932 East Princeton. Thank you, Amy.
This is a conditional use request from Mary Richardson. She's the owner of the property at 932 East Princeton Avenue. The request is to construct an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU. To the rear of the house on the property, staff is recommending approval of the project with conditions. This project is before the Planning Commission because all ADU proposals located in a single-family zoning district require conditional use, and this property is located in the R1 5000 single-family zoning district. This process looks at compatibility, location, and potential impacts of the request. And just a reminder, conditional uses are allowed uses if appropriate conditions can be applied to mitigate any of those adverse impacts. The proposed ADU is approximately 576 square feet. It has a gabled roof and a height of approximately 4 feet 7 3/4 inches. The primary exterior material is composite wood siding. One parking space is proposed on the site. The entrance to the ADU is oriented towards an alley to the rear of the property. The closest house on the property is approximately the closest house adjacent to the property is approximately 50 feet away. And an analysis of the development regulations for ADUs in comparison to what they're proposing is located in attachment E of the staff report. These are some photos of the site and the surrounding development, the main house on the property, the rear alley, as well as the surrounding development on Princeton Avenue. And this slide shows the backyard of the subject property and adjacent property to the west and east. Staff is recommending a condition of approval that the existing chain link fence is replaced with fencing that provides more privacy for the adjacent properties. And that is based on the compatibility standards and the conditional use standards. Even though an accessory building would be allowed without a dwelling 1 feet away from the property line, the dwelling in the accessory building could increase the activity in that area, and so that's the reason for the condition of approval. And in terms of public process for this application, staff sent notices to property owners and residents within 300 feet, notifying them of the project. We also sent a notice to the East Liberty Park Community Organization, and they hosted a meeting that staff and the applicant attended, and they've provided a notice or a letter that's included in your staff report. And then we also received 2 additional comments that are included in your staff report. And staff's reviewed the project and finds that it meets the conditional use standards. And again, we're recommending approval with conditions of the project.
Any questions right now for Amy? No? Well, we'll let you step back and is the applicant here?
I believe the applicant is here, yes.
So we'll bring the applicant up. Do you want to come up and tell us about your project? You'll have 10 minutes. And be sure to state your name into the microphone for the record. And get close to the microphone. Apparently, we're having trouble tonight.
Hi, Mary Richardson. I'm the applicant, and I really don't have anything to add. I mean, I think Amy did a wonderful job covering the project. It's just a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment in my backyard that opens to the alley.
Anybody have questions for the applicant? No? Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Take a step back. We'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the community council here? If you'd like to come up, state your name for the record, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jason Stevenson. I'm the co-chair of the East Liberty Park Community Organization, also called ELPCO. We're the community council where the project is located. We're basically everything from 7th East to 13th East, and from about 8th South down to 17th South. So Liberty Park to East High is a good way to think about us. So we learned about the project through an email back in January, and realized quickly that this was going to be one of the first conditional use for an ADU in the city. So we wanted to do it right. We wanted to kind of figure this out. We also wanted to learn more about ADUs, because one thing we learned from this project is there's still a lot of confusion out there in the city about what the council passed, what the parameters are, where they can go, who can live there. And so what we chose to do was actually hold a small meeting with the applicant ahead of our normal community council meeting, where we invited neighbors through a flyer that you can see in the staff report, and also ELPCO board members who are interested to learn more about ADUs in this process. And through this process, we learned that there is still a lot of confusion, even among people who read the newspaper every day and kind of follow these issues. So that's just one thing I wanted to relay, is that as more and more of these come up, ADUs are still a little bit fuzzy in the mind of people that live in our city and work on these issues. So we had a great meeting, and we really want to thank Amy from the Planning Division and also the applicant for being there and answering our questions. And the project, looked good. People wanted to know a little bit more about, how it came about and some of the sight lines. One neighbor showed up, and he had some questions about sort of the distance and the height of the project. Another neighbor who was going to be there actually ended up having her questions answered just through the backyard over the fence conversations that the flyers helped initiate. Most of the neighbors we spoke with and flyered were comfortable with the project, thought it was okay. Maybe didn't quite know what ADUs were, but we did try to explain it within our conversations in the flyer. So we support the project. We think it is definitely going to be a learning process for community councils to go through this. And one thing we tried to do was establish some guidelines, some parameters, an approach that other councils could follow. And so this is something that we'll probably shop around to some of our other co-chairs and folks that might be involved. We also have Dave Richards here, who's the land use advisor for ELPCO. He's got a couple of little more technical comments because he actually understands this stuff. So he'll take it from here.
Evening, commissioners. I think in this specific case, it's a good fit. It's a deep site. The ADU will access off the alley and back, so there's less impact with the street parking. I think that's one of the better ones I think you'll see come before you. This gave us a chance to start looking at the latest version of the ADU ordinance and study it a bit and see how it might impact our neighborhoods. And I've got sort of 3 basic comments I'd like to relate to you. First one is, parking's going to always be an issue. I mean, every project that comes up, parking's an issue. Suggestion is that you might consider amending the ordinance where you require 1 off-street stall per bedroom as opposed per unit. You get multiple bedroom units, maybe someone's got a roommate, you have the potential for 3 or 4 cars rather than 1 or 2. Something to consider. And the other, there's no mention in the ordinance about dealing with the quantity and proximity of ADUs. And if you get several within a block radius, you're effectively creating a rezone of that little section of the neighborhood. And you've got people that have moved in there because it's a single-family district. They're paying taxes in there because that's what they want. And you've got to weigh their interests about it maintaining that versus the people who want to add ADUs to their property for their reasons. And there's going to have to be a balance worked out in there somewhere. And then the third one, purpose statement 21A 200A6 states the goal is to broaden range of affordable housing. And I guess my question is, how do we verify that that actually happens? Pretty much everything I've seen lately that's either getting planned or built is really pushing towards the maximum market rate that they can achieve. That really doesn't address the goal of affordable housing. That term is bandied about quite a bit. And I think it's something that we need to address a little more specifically. And that's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission. And Amy, you ready for questions? Anybody have any questions? Ready to discuss this?
I mean, I'll just start by saying I think this is really an ideal first start into the ADU world, because this one seems like, as was stated by the ELPCO representatives, that it's the deep lot. The fact that this is a single story, it's, I think one of my concerns with the ADUs going forward, and I don't know when they come to us, I think staff is usually very good about including information like this, but those sort of sightlines of privacy and how that's going to impact the backyards of the neighbors in which these things are have the potential to impact, that'll be important to me. I appreciate the fence recommendation. I think that's a good one for this. Generally, I'm pretty excited about it and think it's a great first project.
Great. Anyone else?
I agree with Weston.
Okay.
Amy, is the applicant okay with the conditions?
I didn't ask them if they were okay with the conditions of approval, but I did inform them that we were imposing those beforehand. In my conversation with her, it sounded like those were some things that she may have already been considering prior to this condition, but she may be able to better speak to if she's happy with those
Well, you mean to
conditions
have
or
her come
not.
up? Would the applicant please come up? Get close to one of those microphones. Did you hear Adrian's question?
The conditions, meaning the fence?
The fence, the glazing,
So I didn't realize that glazing was a condition. I thought that was just part of another ordinance.
So if I can clarify, the glazing is actually a requirement in the ADU ordinance if it's closer than 4 feet to a side or rear property line. In this case, because the rear property line's adjacent to an alley, it's exempt from that. So any windows required on the side of the building, such as openings for egress, those will have to use obscured glazing if they're within 10 feet of a property line. I'm sorry, not 4 feet of a property line. So the condition of approval is more of a clarification because that wasn't included on the plans, and so that's just more of a clarification that that is required.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the fence on both sides, I guess I would assume that's a privacy fence. I mean, the recommendation says that, keep it all, what is the wording, transparent, or keep, but also private.
Private yet permeable, yeah.
Permeable, yeah, thanks. So I'm trying to imagine what that is, because I imagine a wooden fence is your next step from a chain link fence, and that's not permeable unless you put gaps. And I didn't really see the reason for it because there's no neighbors, like there's no one living, like there's a garage on one side and then there's just empty lot on the other side. So I didn't feel like anybody's privacy was actually going to be infringed upon, especially if you have the glazed windows. But I think, wooden fences are nice, and I'm not gonna put my feet, dig my heels in about something like that. So.
So you're okay with the
Sure.
condition?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's gonna work. It's fine.
Okay. The public hearing's closed. Sorry. Okay. So you've answered your question.
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Comment? Questions? A motion?
I'll make a motion.
Go for it, Sarah.
Based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented, and input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use petition PLN PCM 2018-00999 for the detached accessory dwelling unit with the conditions of approval below, listed 1 through 5.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Carolyn? Any discussion? No. Andres?
Yes.
Adrian?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yep.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Clark?
Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm going to recuse myself on this next matter. I have a potential appearance of a conflict of interest. I've spoken with both the property owner and the appellant. They're both aware. Allison is going to take over for me.
Thank you. So we'll call up Eric. Eric?
James, yes.
James, okay, Eric. For our special exception appeal at approximately 1305 East 2nd Avenue.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, members of the commission, the item before you tonight is for an appeal of administrative special exception. So a special exception approval was granted prior on an administrative level, and that has since been appealed, which elevates it to the Planning Commission in a public hearing tonight. It's for an inline addition to a detached garage at 1305 East 2nd Avenue. That special exception is needed due to a non-compliance. The ordinance requires that a detached structure be located no closer than 10 feet to a adjacent primary structure or a neighboring home. And in this case, it's an existing non-complying structure. Before we begin at that, I just wanted to make mention that we did receive a notice last night from a Mr. Sean Egan, who's an attorney representing the appellant in this case. And they notified us that they've commenced legal action against Mr. Svensson, the applicant, to stop the construction of the garage. And with that, they've asked that the commission consider tabling the item until that the legal proceedings are resolved. With that, you'll need to decide whether you want to table it or hear the item based on, of course, the commission's decision is to look at the special exception according to our ordinance versus the legal actions that are being sought against the applicant. So,
Have we reviewed this? Has everybody looked at this?
Is the legal action over the acquiescence component? That's specifically what it's.
The property line?
Correct. Yes, that's the primary focus. Is the
boundary line dispute.
Exactly, the boundary line discrepancy.
What do we want to do? We can go ahead and hear the special exception. We could hear the special exception and then decide to table it.
We have advertised this for a public hearing, so I
So
think
we
it
do
might be
need to
wise
go.
to go
Okay.
through and do the public hearing.
All right. Eric, why don't you give us the rest of your presentation?
Fantastic. Okay, so it's important to note that when a administrative approval is elevated to this status, public hearing, it's reviewed de novo. In other words, we're looking at it all new. So we're not taking into consideration any prior approval that was given. In this case, just for clarity's sake, the applicant is Mr. Paul Svensson and the appellant is Jefferson Gross, because we're going to look at both the application and I'll give some thoughts on that, and then also talk about the appeal. So just for some proximity here, this property is located in the R1 5000 zone, single-family residential zone in the Avenues Community Plan, and the property is slightly unique in that the home that we're looking at is a former carriage house of the adjacent property. And so there's a unique property line between the two properties, and the garage itself includes a shared wall for the two properties. So that is a little bit unique. In considering this request, we look at the conditions for an inline addition, and the two concerns that are of most interest in why it's before you tonight is to verify that, one, that the building line does not create any new non-compliance, and that the roof line and the exterior materials are compatible with the original structure. So in looking at that first standard, it's important to note, I've tried to do a representation here. This is the existing garage line, and the proposed addition is in blue. And so, I know it's kind of hard to see here, but the proposed addition extends directly towards the west. The non-compliance of this particular structure occurs right here, in that it's approximately 4 feet 6 inches from the adjacent home here, where it would be required to be 10, but that is a legal non-complying situation. The new addition, you can see that as the home jogs here, the new addition would start at approximately 6 foot 6 inches from that home. So as we see it, the new addition follows the special exception regulation to not create any new non-compliance. It maintains the same non-compliance and then moves even further from the home. The second issue is on architectural compatibility. As we look at that, we just look at the height of the structure and that it follows the same basic building lines. In this case, the top image represents the existing structure, and then as proposed, this would extend the garage out and add additional one parking stall inside, maintaining the same roof line. And then I should also mention the building addition would add 300 square feet to the property, which would put it right at the limit, but still within the parameters of the zoning ordinance for accessory structures. The second portion is to look at the key issues of the appeal. The appeal primarily deals with a boundary line dispute, in that the boundary line, again, it has a bit of a jog, but for the most part, as shown on the surveyed plans, sets 1.5 feet off the back of the structure, where the appellant's argument is that the fence line, which is directly in line with the rear wall, is actually the boundary by acquiescence. So that's the key to the appeal, and with that, the construction would constitute a trespass, and in order to construct this, they would need to remove this fence, which would create security and privacy concerns between the two properties. So with that, so this is kind of a depiction here. I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but this line would be in line with the wall and fence line, and so the proposed addition would come directly towards, directly forward, and then this is where the property line jogs along the fence line. So this portion of the fence line is not necessarily of concern, but the wall line there is. And this is another image. You can kind of see that same jog goes out. And again, the surveyed property line shows 1.5 feet here, whereas the appellant is arguing that it's actually the fence line, which is represented by the red line. So that's the primary dispute there. In looking at that, it's important to consider that cities in general, and Salt Lake City is no different, they don't have the authority nor the responsibility to discuss boundary line disputes. Those are a civil matter. A city could never be liable for that type of consideration. And then also, of course, with this, your primary concern is to look at if any new non-compliances are being created. As far as the other issues, we feel that, any of the construction would be able to happen within the property lines of the applicant here. So this is, I apologize, I think this line got moved. Drunk on me. So actually this should be depicted that, again, that it's about 1.5 feet to the south of that boundary line as we show it on the survey. The other issues that were brought up was that this construction again would destroy the fence, and therefore it would create the security issues. And we're saying that regardless of where the property lines are, the appellant would be able to construct a fence on their own property, thus providing security and privacy for their property. Let's see. With that, again, planning staff is recommending approval of the inline addition, and would say that the other property line dispute could be handled in a civil manner. So, happy to take any questions. And
any questions for Eric? Anybody totally confused? What? Okay.
This special exception, just to reiterate then. Can everybody hear me now before I start commenting again? Everybody, hands? Okay, good. So then this special exception can be granted and not acted upon if it's determined that this court case is in favor of the appellant.
Correct, and they could speak to that, but the Planning Commission could grant this, and in the legal proceedings we were forwarded, it looks like they're proposing a temporary restraining order to stop the construction of it, and again, that would happen in court. That wouldn't be our issue to look at it at all, but they could work that out amongst themselves as to hold off on the project or whatever. But our end of it would grant approval, which would be good for up to a year.
Okay.
Should we bring the applicant up? Okay, is the applicant here?
I just want to point out there's really kind of two applicants in this.
Right.
So from a time standpoint, I would give 10 minutes to the applicant of the special exception and the applicant of the appellant.
Okay, so as Paul Svensson's the applicant, if he'd come up now and you have 10 minutes. Be sure to state your name and stay close to the microphone.
Paul Svensson, I'm the original applicant. Eric has done a very nice job of laying out the issues, and he's been terrific to work with all the way through. I won't take up 10 minutes. I just wanted to say two really quick things. I think there are two separate issues that are at work here. There's clearly a boundary line dispute. Now that has caught us totally off guard because we did a survey of the property and we had no idea that there was any dispute whatsoever. All of the work that we're proposing to do is within the surveyed boundaries of the parcel. But there's a disagreement there, and that process will work its way through the courts. As Eric mentioned, we were served with a summons and complaint last night, and we're being taken to court tomorrow morning for a temporary restraining order hearing, and we'll just take it as it comes. And of course, if that process goes against us and it turns out that we don't own this land that the survey says we own, then these plans just go in the trash and we need to start over with another approach. That's, I think, totally clear. That, however, is not what's in front of you tonight, as Eric said. There are 7 standards for a special exception, and here, as Eric indicated in his staff report, there has been no opposition raised with respect to any of those standards. And if I can, I'll just go through them really quickly, so for the record, sort of, and then I'll step back and you can do your work. There are, as I said, 7 standards. The first one is compliance with the zoning ordinance and district purposes. And here we're in the R1 5000 zone. It's generally for single-family residences and reasonably large lots. And here, accessory structures are a permitted use or a permitted structure. And oversized 2-car garage or kind of a tight 3-car garage is totally typical up in this Federal Heights neck of the woods. The second criteria is no substantial impairment of property value. Here, again, having a 720 square foot garage is very common amongst neighbors. I would just note that the garage that we're attached to is, I think, almost exactly that size, maybe just a skosh bigger. So there's certainly precedent here. The third item is no undue impact. Here, I think there's really none to speak of. The overall situation on the site will hardly be affected at all. You know, we're talking about a 300 square foot increase in size, so it's really a minimal effect. Compatible with surrounding development, I think that is exactly sort of the same reasoning as the no substantial impairment. This size of garage is typical in the neighborhood. The neighbor's garage is the same size. I think it's perfectly compatible. No destruction of significant features. Here, I just think that's not applicable. There aren't any significant features here. It's a pretty humdrum garage. 6 is no material pollution of the environment. That's not applicable as far as I can tell. And number 7 is just compliance with the standards. And that's an important one because under the zoning ordinance, it's in particular 21A 52030A13. It says in particular that we can do inline additions with respect to existing buildings that are non-complying as to yard area or height regulations, which is the case here, as long as we follow the existing building line, which we're doing. We don't add any dwelling units, which of course we're not, and that this is a legitimate architectural addition. And I think we've taken some pains to make this garage nice and in keeping with the building that's there now. So that's really all I had for now. I am very curious to hear what the appellant has to say, so hopefully I'll have an opportunity to respond if something new comes up. But I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Any questions for Paul right now? I think we're good, so if you step back.
Yep.
And we'll call the appellant. So if you be sure to state your name and speak into the microphone, and you have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Okay.
I'm not a real estate developer, so I'm not really familiar with all the zoning requirements and ordinances.
And your name is?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Jefferson Gross, and
Okay.
I reside at 1315 East 2nd Avenue, right next door to the property of the applicant. And as I mentioned, I'm not a real estate developer. I'm not conversant with the ordinances and the like, but I'll try to do my best in this. The first I found out about this proposal wasn't from a neighbor, from the applicant, saying that they wanted to do something proximate to my property. First time I got notice of this was on January 3, when I had notice of this application saying I had basically 2 days to respond from a December 21 date on an envelope that was postmarked on December 24th. So I had 2 days after the vacation to respond and provide comments, and tried the best I could in that short of a period of time. After the staff approved the special exception, I then raised the issue about title. And I think that it should give pause to this planning commission to approve any exceptions, any plans on property over which title is disputed. And the basis of the dispute on the title, and I've been there for over 6 years at the property, but talking to neighbors after the division of this property or subdivision in 1980, there was a wall and a fence erected by both Mr. Dibble, who was a previous owner of 1305 2nd Avenue, and the owners of my parcel. And that was long-standing, and that was the boundary, and both property owners respected it, both as far as privacy and the like. And I had always understood that that was going to be my property line. Now, incidentally, I keep on hearing a reference to a survey. I have not seen a survey in this file. The first survey I saw was in a response by the applicant to our TRO application, but it's not before the commission, and it's just not part of the application. And so when the staff said that there was a survey upon which they were relying in saying that the property line is something different than my fence line, that is not in the file. But in any event, I would think it would give pause to the commission and frankly to the staff that there's a dispute about the ownership of the property over which an application for a special exception is pending. And it's true that, and believing that that would give the staff pause and this commission pause before proceeding with this application, we filed suit after we got the recommendation from the staff to this commission saying that those issues about title, those issues about the fence, my family's security, privacy, weren't of much concern. Then we filed suit yesterday, and we have a temporary restraining order hearing set for tomorrow. The cause of action, it's boundary by acquiescence, but the basis of the action is to quiet title to the property, and so that everyone understands what their property is and what it's not. And so that, we think, should proceed before this commission acts. I should mention that the applicant in this case is largely relying in his opposition to the temporary restraining order upon the staff's recommendation here, and I presume if this commission approves the proposal, we'll also rely upon that and give him some imprimatur of approval as far as title. And I don't think that that is very appropriate, so it's not as if these things are proceeding separately. Instead, the applicant is relying upon what's happening here. And so while I appreciate the staff's disinterest in trying to resolve a quiet title action on its own, I think the pendency of that quiet title action alone should be a basis for tabling this application until those are resolved. Those are my points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this topic? So you can come forward. You need to come up to the microphone, state your name, and you would have 2 minutes. No? Okay. Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing on this and bring it back up to the commission.
I have a question for staff. What's the source of the boundary lines on these drawings that you provided in your report?
So anytime a plans are submitted, site plans are submitted, as they're indicated on here, just even with the markings and showing the property line. We do check those with the boundary lines we have for the property recorded at the county. And it's impossible to get so precise to measure within 1.5 feet to see if these line up, nor would we ever make that determination. If they largely follow what we have, if they seem to not have any major discrepancies, then we proceed forward as if these are, or understanding that these would be survey drawings. Again, if that is incorrect, that is an issue between two neighbors. It's a civil matter. They've taken the appropriate action, filing the suit, and that's something, again, that we would not necessarily look at. We would proceed with the matters as written in the ordinance.
So just to clarify then, what the initial plans submitted by the person building this matched what your records were.
Right, as best as we can determine from the the level of preciseness that we can go by.
Okay.
Discussion?
I guess I'm curious as to our own attorney's thoughts on how that plays into this. Either one of our attorneys, I guess.
Can you be a little more specific?
I mean, is that something that we should care about or not?
I understand if there's a pending boundary dispute, I definitely understand why there would be concern or why that would give you pause. But in looking into it, the Planning Commission is a commission of limited jurisdiction. The Planning Commission doesn't make decisions about boundary disputes, and you have very strict guidelines in making decisions about special exceptions. So I would guide you to follow those. The district court has jurisdiction to adjudicate those issues, and they've appropriately filed a case in district court to adjudicate that issue. And my understanding about the boundary dispute is that the boundary by acquiescence is that there's a boundary line that's been established and recorded by the city recorder, but since then a fence has gone up and there's been some changed circumstances, and I think that matter needs to be settled in district court and not here tonight. And if you decide to go forward and make a decision, just know that there's an appeal process. They can request for a stay. So there's things that that both parties have remedies to. So.
It's outside of what we decide.
What was that?
It's outside of what our decision is.
I mean, they can appeal.
They can appeal our decision.
They can appeal your decision
okay.
to an appeals hearing officer
okay.
and ask for a stay on that as well. So, and then appeal that to district court and ask for a stay on that. So.
Okay.
So then, do you feel like our decision preferences either side, depending on how we find?
Are you asking if our decision tonight effectively?
Yeah, would it help, say, their issue tomorrow? Would it help one side or the other?
I am not going to hear that or make that decision tomorrow, and I'm not totally familiar with the pleadings. But again, the Planning Commission is very limited, and so whatever decision is made tonight is based on the limited jurisdiction in the ordinances, and what the court is looking at tomorrow is something much different. And what the court is looking at tomorrow isn't about the merits of the case anyway. It's about the immediacy of the potential harm.
Somebody want to make a motion?
Well, I generally agree with staff. If you look at each one of those standards, I don't see that any of the standards, or I believe that all of the standards are being met by the project. And I think I would be willing to make a motion unless anyone else wants to make any
I think
statements.
that's good.
Jump in, Weston.
Okay. Based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the special exception request for an inline addition at 1305 East 2nd Avenue. And the Commission finds that the project complies with review standards as demonstrated in Attachment E of the staff report.
Any second?
I'll second.
Brenda, thank you. Okay, we'll take any other discussion? Okay, we'll vote. Brenda?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Sarah?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Adrian?
Yes.
Andres?
Yay.
Okay, it passes unanimously. Thank you. That concludes our business tonight. We have a work session, so take it away. Get set up. I think, no.
Here, half. And why not address putting?
It was mostly her yelling at us.
It's, it won't be, it's short. I'll go through it quickly. Are you all ready?
Yes.
This is, you know what, feel free to continue. I mean, we can talk, and this is very informal, so feel free to get a cookie, get a drink. So I think a few commissioners have asked, and we also think it's a good idea to maybe just have a little, I don't know, briefing discussion about plan developments. Kind of the purpose of this is that, you know, last year in 2018, nearly half of all the petitions that you all reviewed were plan developments, which is a lot of cases. I mean, it makes up a lot of your workload, so we want to make sure that we're doing things right for you. The plan development ordinance that was, we rewrote the plan development ordinance, and you were all, you know, or many of you participated in that. It was about a year ago, but we do have some newer commissioners, and thought that maybe we should just give a little overview of the plan development ordinance itself. And also what we want to do is just provide this opportunity to maybe get some feedback from the commissioners. How do you think things are going with plan developments? Is there anything else that you want us to provide to help you make decisions? Is there maybe something that in the future we can do some other trainings on some very specific things? We'd be happy to do that. So just a really quick overview on really why you see plan developments or maybe different types of plan developments. There's really kind of two main types. The first one is a modification to zoning regulations. Within that, there's two different types of that type. One is that there are plan developments or applications that are specifically mentioned in the zoning code. For example, the zoning code specifically states that you can ask for 5 feet of additional height in certain zoning districts through the plan development process. Also says that you can ask for a plan development to do off-site parking in zones that don't allow The other type of modification to zoning regulations are not those specifically stated. The plan development ordinance says that the planning commission has the authority to pretty much review a project that has a change to any dimensional type or any zoning regulation other than use. Other than use and density. So those are things that are not, spelled out in the ordinance, and that's really makes up most of what you all see. Those are, and maybe not, I don't know if I'm using the appropriate legal term, but we'd consider those discretionary applications, meaning that they have development rights without getting a plan development. That developer is coming here, it's the choice of their own. They're trying to get something more. What that means is that Planning Commission, you have the ability to deny those applications if they don't meet the standards. The next type of plan development are those that are actually required by ordinance. We have a couple of zoning districts. Two of those is the gateway mixed use and the commercial shopping, where it says in the zone that if you were to do a new development or a new construction or a big enough addition, you have to go through the plan development process as your development review process. These are a little trickier. They're not really discretionary because we're actually requiring them to come to you to get approval for that project. It's a little more difficult to deny those projects because then we are really denying some development rights associated with that. We will make sure as planning staff that if those types of projects come your way, that we try to point that out in our staff reports so that you're aware of what you're looking at. So what cannot be approved through the PD process? One is any additional building height in the foothills or single-family or two-family residential zones, specifically not allowed to be reviewed as a plan development. The Planning Commission cannot approve land uses that are not allowed in the base zone. And the Planning Commission, in those zones that have zoning density limitations, the Planning Commission cannot approve additional density. So like the RMF zones, if somebody comes in and they only have a certain lot size, but they want more dwelling units, you cannot approve that, except in our rewrite of the plan development ordinance, you all forwarded a positive recommendation to a specific regulation that says that if you are converting a non-conforming commercial use to a residential use in the RMF zones, that you all can basically waive the density limitation. We got that in working with the community because non-conforming commercial uses are an issue in some of the RMF zones, and they thought that would be a good thing to do to try to convert those and to increase our housing stock. So what is the purpose of a plan development? This is a really key, important thing of the whole plan development process. There's kind of what the city wants, sometimes what the developer wants, and then it's the balancing act that we always play. What the city wants, out of the purpose statement of the plan development, is basically getting a better product than what can be achieved through strict compliance with zoning regulations. And that's specifically stated in the purpose statement of the plan developments. Also, to implement city goals. That's what we would like to see, a project that helps implement our city goals. Now, there's what developers sometimes want when they come in and ask for plan development. There's a couple things that we see is they need to get more of something. They want maybe to go into a setback so they could get some more square footage to make a project pencil out, things of that nature. And in some cases, it's to overcome some peculiar situation. It's kind of a weird property, or Salt Lake City is a built-out property with interesting lot configurations and interesting zoning sometimes. It doesn't really necessarily match the existing development patterns. So we see a lot of plan developments that come in because to try to meet the zoning is just makes things very difficult. So the trick for us and the Planning Commission is really to try to look at those and balance those out, and look at it, how do we accommodate development, but then utilize our plan development process, utilize those standards to get a better product that implements our city goals. I mean, I think that's just something that the Planning Commission always should kind of keep in mind when looking at these types of projects. I'm just going to give a very quick overview because these are super exciting slides that I have here. But just kind of roll through the plan development standards really fast, just to give a little refresher, because, like I said, most of the plan developments that the Planning Commission reviews are discretionary, and basically, these are the standards that you're reviewing the project. You can approve, deny, or approve with conditions projects based on these standards. And then again, it gets a little trickier with the non-discretionary plan developments, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So the first is the first standard is plan development objectives, and there's really three components to this first standard, and these are all spelled out basically what this says is, does the project meet the purpose statement of the plan development? So one, are we getting a better product than what we could get through strict compliance of the code? And does it help to achieve a city goal? The third component of this is that the plan development must incorporate one of the listed objectives that we have in our purpose statement. So that's preserving, protecting, creating open space and natural lands, historic preservation, affordable housing or meeting our housing goals, enhances accessibility and mobility, minimizes resource consumption, impacts on natural lands, or implements master plan goals. A project only needs to meet one of those objectives. Please. No, actually, it's kind of a separate thing. So in the plan development chapter, there's this whole big giant paragraph that's in the purpose statement. It's the very first paragraph and has all this stuff about better product, help us implement city goals. Then it says, in addition to all this, it must meet one of these objectives. And so this is something that we as staff should be addressing throughout our report as well as in the standards table. And if we need to do a little bit better job of that, we certainly will. One thing that we have tried to do lately, I don't think it's happening in every report, but add a little section in the key considerations section of the reports that says, here's maybe how we're getting something a little bit better than what the base standard says, or how does this differ from what the base standards say? I think the RMF zones are a pretty good scenario to look at with plan developments. Right now, our RMF zones they have very, very few design standards. You can build a pretty ugly apartment complex by right in our RMF zone. But you can come in for a plan development request and, maybe they're looking for relief from a setback, maybe from some landscaping. But what that does is that opens the door for you all to utilize the standards to try to get a better designed product, to get a product that actually is compatible with the neighborhood more so than what we could just get by right. The next standard is master plan compatibility, and that's where we just say, here's what the master plan says about this area. Sometimes it's just basic land use stuff, or sometimes there's some very specific design criteria in the master plan, and project needs to meet the master plan. The third is a big one, design and compatibility. So is the project compatible with the neighborhood in relation to scale, mass, intensity, building orientation, materials, perimeter setbacks, pedestrian interest and interaction, lighting, dumpster loading areas, and parking buffers. This is really, this is one of the big changes that we had when we did the rewrite to the plan development ordinance. In the past, sometimes I felt as though we were on a little bit shaky ground with our old plan development ordinance when we're getting into a lot of real kind of design criteria on front facades and stuff. I thought it was, good decisions, but wasn't a lot to back us up. In this case, we actually have a very specific standard now that says this is what the neighborhood looks like. And so this project needs to be compatible with that. Number 4, landscaping. Does the project preserve mature trees? Or the landscaping along the periphery of the project? Does the landscape is it scaled appropriately and designed to minimize impacts? The 5th, mobility. Does the project implement city goals relation to to promote safe and efficient circulation in relation to impacts on local streets, pedestrians, bicyclists, connectivity, and emergency vehicle access? Existing site features, does the project preserve any natural or built features that might be contributed to the character of the neighborhood? And utilities, can the utilities adequately serve the project? I'm going to jump up again here a little bit. So again, these standards are very important to really pay attention to look at, to learn, to understand. When you make a decision on a project, when you include conditions that are placed on the project, they need to be based on these standards. That's what allows us to be defensible, because we have these standards in place. So it's very important that we're providing you with the detailed enough information that you can make appropriate decisions on that. The last kind of thing I wanted to throw out there, and really it's because you've been seeing quite a few of these, is time limit situations. Plan developments are valid for 1 year or until the project receives a building permit, or at least they have full building permit plans that have been submitted in our building permits office. It seems you've been definitely seeing more and more of these, and honestly, it's not unusual for projects, whether especially very large projects, in some cases smaller projects, to need to get an extension, and the Planning Commission has the ability to grant an extension. A lot of times it comes down to financing issues. We've run into a lot of issues where people or developers are trying to deal with very technical building code type stuff, access things. We've had a lot of issues with our fire code recently that requires some additional time to work through. And so it's not unusual for us to get those. I think the key thing that for the Planning Commission, and it's also kind of spelled out in the zoning ordinance, is that really what you're looking at on these time extensions is making sure that there isn't a change in some sort of circumstance related to the project or the neighborhood that might need that to be reviewed again. If that is the case, we as staff would try to point that out when we get the request and send it on, but that's one of the things that that you're really kind of the one and only thing you're really reviewing when it comes to the time extensions.
So I've been on, I think, 2.5, 3 years now, and we've had a couple come through that, not many, but a couple come through that are getting like a second or even third extension. Do we have any kind of limits on that? Because at some point, it feels foolish to just keep pretending something's going to get built there.
Yeah, I think actually and you can continue to grant those year-long extensions. That's where that standard comes into play. If we keep granting extensions, but we're finding that the neighborhood is actually changing, and that maybe what you reviewed the project against originally isn't really applicable anymore because of changes to that neighborhood, I think that gives you the ability to, that definitely gives you the ability to deny the extension and require the project to go back through the process.
I'm
I'm not aware of that ever happening.
I was going to say, has that ever happened where it has been denied?
I'm not aware of that actually ever happening. But in most cases, a lot of these that we've seen that have actually come through, they haven't been in areas where we've had really drastic change, like along that, maybe that street frontage or in that area. So I know we're at the end of the meeting. Everybody's chomping at the bit to get home, so I kind of tried to make that short. And really, it was again to just try to open up the discussion a bit. And if anybody has any ideas on, how's the ordinance working for you? Is there anything else that the staff can do in our reports or our presentations related to plan developments that might help you make decisions? And then also, if there's something else associated with these that you might want to get a little bit more deeper into, just let us know, and we'd be happy to. We like to do these trainings on nights that don't have a lot of action, so that we're not keeping you here until midnight. So let us know. And does anybody have anything at this point?
I think it would be helpful if in the staff reports, there is an evaluation of what's permitted as of right versus what they're asking for.
I was going to ask that same thing.
Okay.
And then we can really evaluate whether what we're getting is an enhanced product. And if, I like it when the staff reports have the key considerations and that lays out the issues for us. And I prefer to see the tables earlier rather than have to sift through all of the plans to get to the evaluations and the analysis. And that may just be a function of the PDFs. If there's a way to link it so you can just you could pull up the standards and the evaluation that the staff has done and look at it with the plans, that would be helpful. I don't know, but I've struggled with that, just challenged when it comes to my.
So it does seem kind of funny to have them like trailing at the end.
I mean, I would almost rather see the plans as their own PDF, and then we've got the staff report, and you can kind of go between them both. At the same time,
Actually, that's something that we could certainly do. So maybe, we can, I think we would probably still include them in the report just for maybe others, like as it goes on the website. Maybe not, but we could pull the plans out and put them as a separate document in your Dropbox.
It might make
certainly.
the PDFs work better too.
Yeah, it's hard
Because
to
sometimes
filter.
it takes them forever to load, especially the drawings.
Well, one thing that I have noticed, and it's something that we definitely, if we kept them in the staff report, some planners aren't reducing the size of the documents. So you're scrolling through 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and then all of a sudden you get to a 24 by 36, and then everybody's going like this to try to figure out how to make it work. So yeah, we'll look at doing that maybe. That's easy enough to just do a separate PDF of the plans in your Dropbox.
Or maybe a separate PDF for the standards, so that those are separate, so that those are easily accessible. Yeah.
Sure.
Great, that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. I think we're done. The meeting's adjourned.
Sorry, what did you say?
The meeting's adjourned. Can you hear me now?